This is about as packed an auditorium as I've spoken to in a long time. I want to thank all the professors for requiring their students to come tonight. I want to thank all of you guys for coming. So here's what I want to do, all right? I want to talk for about 40 minutes. I want to do about 20 minutes of Q&A. I heard the eruption of enthusiasm when Afreen and Ellie pointed out that the presentation includes the Q&A and you're not allowed to leave, right? That was enthusiasm, I think. The deal is, I'm going to talk about what it means to be a 21st century leader. My job is to make it as interesting as possible. Your job is to engage me in the course of the presentation and then ask smart and insightful questions. You will be gone in an hour. Everybody will feel enriched. Does that sound like a good deal? Okay, I love it. So, I'll take you back 4 weeks. Kansas City, Monday Night Football, fourth quarter. Hussein Abdullah picks off Tom Brady, runs it back for a pick six, slides to his knees, goes into Sajda al-Shukr, the Muslim prayer of gratitude. Anybody remember what happened next? Flag, 15 yards, that's sportsmanlike conduct. So, I'll tell you right now, no Northern Illinois graduate, whether you are an NFL ref, or a public school teacher, or a nurse, or an artist, should be able to look at Muslim prayer and think to themselves, that deserves a flag. That is an example of being an uneducated person. An example of being an educated person in the 21st century has everything to do with the positive and proactive engagement of religious diversity. That's the subject of the talk tonight. My argument to you is that in order to be a leader in the 21st century in the United States of America, you have to involve religious diversity. That doesn't mean you have to be religious, right? It just means that you have to be able to engage the religious diversity and devotion that is your country. That is my argument to you tonight. I want to unfold that argument in a variety of ways. I want to begin with the vision. I want to articulate what I think is a vision of what it means to engage religious diversity positively and proactively. We're going to begin that vision from where we are now. Any vision begins with where you sit today, what the reality is right now. And we're going to go from that, we're going to go from here to the possibility of someplace better. I'm calling that from diversity to pluralism. Okay? The second thing I want to talk to you about is a knowledge base. What do you need to know to be an interfaith leader in the 21st century? Right? What do you need to know about history? What do you need to know about theology? What do you need to know about your own religion or secular humanist belief system and other people's religions? The third thing I want to talk to you about is a skill set. What kind of skills do you need to have? What stories do you need to be able to tell? What activities do you need to be able to shape? What conversations do you need to be able to facilitate? And finally, I want to give you just a little bit about what this is going to mean for you for the rest of your lives and careers. Because I'll tell you something, I don't think that NFL ref was an outright bigot. I don't think he thought to himself, boy, there was a Muslim on the field, he gets 15 yards. I just think he was ignorant. I just think that he didn't know what Muslim prayer looked like. So when Tim Tebow goes down on one knee in Christian prayer, that is recognized as something that's allowable in the NFL, as it ought to be. Well, if you're an educated person in the 21st century, my argument to you is you should not just be able to recognize Christian prayer, but Jewish prayer and Muslim prayer and Baha'i prayer and Hindu prayer and Jain prayer, and you ought to be able to recognize secular humanist and spiritual seeker observance as well. Let's begin with vision. What does it mean to be here? Here. So America, the most religiously diverse nation in human history, the most religiously devout nation in the West at a time of global religious conflict. If you remember one line from my talk tonight, remember that line. The most religiously diverse nation in human history, the most religiously devout nation in the West at a time of global religious conflict. By the way, I'm going to say that a lot to you tonight. If you remember one line, remember this line. So at the end of it, you'll probably have like a whole page of lines you got to remember. That's how I roll. Just letting you know. What does it mean, right, to be that religiously diverse in a place in which people's religious beliefs count? I got to tell you, I lived in England for several years. I've been in other parts of the world. Folks there don't say grace before meals with the same level of frequency that Americans do. And they're on surveys, they don't rate God a high priority for them. They don't go to church or synagogue or mosque or temple or gurdwara on a regular basis in other industrialized nations. Religious beliefs count in America in profound ways at a time of global religious conflict. So what does that mean? That means that everything you see in your Facebook news feed, everything you find on your Twitter feed news-wise, things that you might catch in the evening news or in the morning newspaper, right? Diaspora groups of those communities who are at each other's throats abroad, they live cheek by jowl here. They live in the city of Chicago, on the same block. They're in the same dorm and floor at Northern Illinois University. That is a tinderbox waiting to happen. That is religious diversity. If you'll notice, I'm using diversity in a somewhat different way tonight. I am not using it in the way that your high school used it. I am not using it in the way that commercials on television use it. I am not saying diversity is necessarily a good thing. Baghdad is a diverse place. It is also a civil war. There are lots of diverse places in this country and on this planet that are rife with prejudice, that are rife with division, that are rife with violence. The question is not how you get more diversity. The question is how you get more pluralism. That's why the vision of an interfaith leader has to be from diversity, from a place where people who believe in different things, who look different, they're living in close quarters. How do you get from here to there, to pluralism? What is pluralism? What distinguishes it from diversity? Pluralism is the proactive and positive engagement of diversity towards constructive ends. If you remember one line that I say tonight, remember that line. The positive, what was the other line I made you guys remember? It wasn't that long ago, right? It's going to keep coming. The positive and proactive engagement of diversity to constructive ends. Michael Walzer, the great political philosopher, puts it this way. How do we in America embrace our differences and maintain a common life? At IFYC, we define pluralism in 3 parts. Number 1, respect for identity. I'm going to make this very plain. Respect for identity means you get to be who you are. Muslim or Christian or atheist, gay or straight, Sikh or Jain. You get to be who you are. Respect for identity. But that's not the only value in pluralism. Value number 2, relationships between different communities. Look, you can't have a country where people are only saying, I'm going to be who I am and express that, right? Because that's like a civil war waiting to happen. Second part of pluralism is relationships between diverse communities. And the third part of pluralism is a commitment to the common good. What's the common good? Well, this thing called Northern Illinois University is a common good. This thing called the city of DeKalb is a common good. Chicago, Illinois, America, the planet. Those are all common goods. We all contribute to the health of the whole, from diversity to pluralism. From a situation where people of different backgrounds live in close quarters with each other, to a place where that diversity is engaged for positive and constructive ends, where there is respect for people's identities, where there's relationships between diverse communities, where there is a commitment to the common good. The first part of interfaith leadership is that clarity of vision. The second part of interfaith leadership is a knowledge base, not just enough to have a vision, right? You have to have some knowledge to go along with it. Let me give you one of the first places that an interfaith knowledge base was dropped on me. December 1999, turn of the millennium, I'm in Cape Town, South Africa. I'm seeing Nelson Mandela speak, maybe the greatest person who lived in the 20th century. And the first thing Mandela does when he comes to the stage is he points out into the Cape, to Robben Island, where he spent 27 years of his life. And he said, I would still be there, imprisoned in that jail, if it wasn't for the Christians and the Muslims, the Jews and the secular humanists, the African traditionalists and the Hindus in South Africa working together in the struggle against apartheid. And I thought to myself, boy, number 1, I'm inspired. Number 2, I feel ignorant. Because how did I, a college graduate, not know that relationships between diverse religious communities helped win the struggle against apartheid? That is part of the knowledge base of interfaith leadership. What are other parts of the knowledge base of interfaith leadership? What are other inspiring moments in the history of people from different religions working together to free nations, to lead movements, to improve lives? So Mahatma Gandhi, the great Hindu from India, his closest companion in the Hind Swaraj movement, the struggle to free that subcontinent, was a Muslim from Afghanistan, a man named Badsha Khan. The story goes that they would go to villages in India and alternately read from the Bhagavad Gita and the Quran, saying it is important only that the word of God is spoken and people come towards it. Again, a chapter in world history that until I read it after I was in college, I didn't know it existed. A part of my ignorance. In ignorance, you will not have. In ignorance, a leader in 21st century America cannot have. You have to have a knowledge base of interfaith cooperation. Here's another part of that knowledge base. At the very beginning of the United States of America, in the year 1790, our first president, George Washington, receives a letter from a man named Moses Seixas. Moses Seixas, who is the leader of the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island, the Touro Synagogue. As early as 1790, there are organized Jewish communities in the United States of America. Seixas writes to Washington, congratulates him on winning the presidency, and then asks him a very, very deep question. Seixas is fully aware of the treatment of Jews, in Europe especially, how for hundreds of years they've been hated and hounded and harassed. And he wants to know what's going to happen to Jews in this new nation, this new United States of America. And he puts the question to Washington. Washington meditates on the question for some time, and then he sends back a document that I believe is one of the great documents in the American canon, up there with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and King's Letter from the Birmingham jail. It's called The Letter to the Hebrew Congregations of Newport, Rhode Island. And Washington says this to Seixas and to the new nation and to generations hence. He says, this government will give bigotry no sanction and persecution no assistance. May the children of the stock of Abraham sit in safety under their own vine and fig, and let there be none to make them afraid. It wasn't until after college that I knew of the letter to the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island. It wasn't until after college until I knew that early in this country's history, our first president puts a stake in the ground for the importance not of religious diversity, not just of more people from more backgrounds present here, but of religious pluralism, of a nation where people's identities would be respected, where there would be relationships between different communities, where there would be a commitment to the common good. Religious pluralism, a part of U.S. history, a part of world history, a history that you and I together need to know. That is part of the knowledge base of interfaith leadership. Here's a second part of the knowledge base of interfaith leadership. Having what I call an appreciative knowledge of other religions. A few years ago, back to Kansas City for a second. I don't know why this city is on my mind. Maybe because I'm rooting for the Royals over the Giants. It's the Midwesterner in me. So I'm in Kansas City. I'm doing a speech a little bit like this one. And somebody stands up in the audience and says, basically some version of what the heck is wrong with you Muslims. Now generally, I'm a sweet and huggable guy. I don't get mad too often. But this time I, found myself getting a little hot under the collar. I was tired of hearing that question. My response to this cat was, hey look, if the only thing that I knew about Kansas City was the first minute of the evening news every night, the 5 o'clock news, I'd roll up into this town and be like, what the hell is wrong with all you rapists and thugs here? What you know about other people matters. And very simply, you cannot call yourself an educated person. You should not be allowed to graduate from this great university if the only thing you know about 1.5 billion Muslims on the planet is the stuff about ISIS. You should not be able to call yourself a leader in the 21st century if the only thing you know about 1 billion Hindus on the planet is the bad stuff? We are compelled as educated people to have an appreciative knowledge of other religions. We are compelled as educated people to think to ourselves in a diverse society and on a diverse planet, if I am to be a leader for pluralism, I have to know things about your religion that I admire. So, as a Muslim, what are some of the things that I would like folks who are not Muslim to know that they might admire about Islam? So here's just a handful of things. Maybe the greatest American athlete of the 20th century was a Muslim. Not maybe he was a Muslim, he was a Muslim. Maybe he was the greatest American. Anybody know who I'm talking about? That's right. Like, you want to read about where Muhammad Ali got his strength? He talks about the role that Islam plays in his life. Right? I mean, amongst I think at least, maybe y'all argue with me on this, one of the smartest hip-hop artists of the last 20 years, a lot of the smartest hip-hop artists, but I'm thinking about one in particular. He opens up an album from about 20 years ago called Black on Both Sides with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Who? Mos Def. Who said that? That's right. Somebody's old school in here, right? Nice. You know what? I got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. They're just learning how to love hip-hop, and they're just learning how to love Islam, and they tell me all the time, hey, Dad, play that again. Play this. So I'll have it on the CD player in my car, and I'll just turn it up, right? Because what they're doing is they're learning an appreciative knowledge of their own religion, right? One of the funniest comedians of our times is a Muslim cat. He also had a disappearing act a couple years ago. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle, that's right. So why do I say all this, right? People, when you talk about Islam, don't you just talk about the belief system? Look, of course that's important, right? Of course I want folks to know about Ramadan and Hajj and Salat, but I also want you to know about the people that Muslims communities produce. The recent Nobel Prize winner, Malala Yousafzai, Muslim. The founder of the movement of microfinance, Muhammad Yunus, Muslim. The point that I'm making is part of being an educated person is having a knowledge of these kinds of folks that other religions have been responsible for putting into the world. Part 2 of being an interfaith leader is having a knowledge base of interfaith leadership. Part of that is a historical knowledge base, and part of that is an appreciative knowledge of other religions. Part 3 of being an interfaith leader is a skill set of interfaith leadership. Right? It's not just about vision, it's not just about knowledge, you gotta have real skills. Skill number 1 is the skill of public narrative, the skill of storytelling. The interfaith leader who had this best in the 20th century is a guy, is a prince of the black church, grows up in the city of Atlanta. Daddy was a Baptist minister, great-granddaddy was a Baptist minister, great-granddaddy was a Baptist minister, goes to a Baptist college called Morehouse, heads up north to Crozer Theological Seminary, winds up at a place called Fellowship House in Philadelphia in spring of 1950, where he hears a great black intellectual give a sermon on the subject of Christian love. And the embodiment of Christian love in that sermon given by Mordecai Johnson, the president of Howard University, was the great Hindu from India, Mahatma Gandhi. And sitting in the back of that lecture hall was a young student, Martin Luther King Jr., taking it all in, right? Asking himself the question, how is it that a man from a different religion embodied Christian nonviolence better than any other Christian that at least Mordecai Johnson could think of? Martin Luther King Jr. begins to develop a historical basis for his interfaith leadership. But what's most astounding about him is the ability to do public narrative. King is so inspired by the example of Gandhi that he goes to India in 1959. Gandhi's been dead for a dozen years, but King wants to see Gandhi's legacy up close and personal, wants to do darshan with Gandhi's legacy, his own personal witnessing. What astounds King above everything was that Gandhi's movement, though inspired by the Bhagavad Gita, for him was actually an interfaith movement, was a religiously diverse movement. There were not only Hindus involved, there were Muslims, there were Jains, there were Christians, there were Sikhs, there were secular humanists like Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. King comes back to his pulpit at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, 1959, Palm Sunday. Second to last line in his sermon on Palm Sunday goes like this: "O God, our gracious Heavenly Father, we call you this name. We know some call you Allah. We know some call you Brahma. We know some call you Elohim. We know some call you the unmoved mover." Why do I tell you this story? Because if we are to go from diversity to pluralism, if we are to accomplish the vision of an interfaith leader, and if you are to do your duty as an educated person and as a 21st century American leader and acquire a knowledge base around religious diversity, you're still going to have the skill set to put it into a public narrative. You're going to have to see yourself getting up into a pulpit or into a podium someday and preaching the importance of this work. You're going to have to learn how to tell the story about Mandela or George Washington or Martin Luther King Jr., meeting Abraham Joshua Heschel in 1963 in Chicago, bringing thunder from Amos, let justice rain down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. You're going to have to tell the story of King and Heschel marching together in Selma, the great Rabbi Heschel later saying, "I know that the way King and I pray is different, but in Selma it felt like our legs were at worship." You're going to have to be able to tell the story of King's final book, 1967, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? And the great image he uses, the image of the world house, where he says it's like all of us humankind are like a single family that has inherited a great house, a great world house. And all of us, black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Jew and Gentile, Hindu and Muslim, because we can never again live apart, must somehow learn to live with each other in peace. Okay? Part of leadership is public narrative. It's not just learning stories, it's being able to tell them well. You know what folks say to me all the time? They're like, okay, the big problem is that other people are apathetic. I'm great, but other folks are apathetic, right? And I've heard that so many times that I've had to learn how to make that work for me. So here's my analogy. This is the most important thing I'm going to say tonight. By the way, plus the other 7 things that are the most important things I said tonight. Look, the definition of leadership is getting other people to care, right? The definition of leadership is getting other people to care. And that's not just about having a vision, and it's not just about having a knowledge base. It's about being able to tell stories in a way that people say, that implicates me. I'm involved. I want to be a part of that flow. Second skill of an interfaith leader is to be able to run activities that bring people who orient around religion differently together in positive ways. I'm going to tell you something. There are a million ways to get people from different religions to fight. The job of interfaith leaders is to bring people from different religions together in positive ways. That's a skill. It's a hard skill. One of the people that had that skill in spades was a guy named Millard Fuller. Millard Fuller started an organization called Habitat for Humanity. Anybody here heard of Habitat for Humanity? Okay, one of the most inspiring organizations started in America in the last 50, 60 years. But here's something that most folks don't know about Habitat for Humanity, right? Most folks think of Habitat for Humanity as an organization that builds houses for those who need homes, and that's super important. What most people don't know is that Habitat for Humanity is not started as only a house-building organization. It is also started as an ecumenical organization, an organization whose purpose it is to bring people from different parts of the Christian spectrum together to agree on something, to work together. Because Millard Fuller used to say, you can't get Pentecostals and Presbyterians to talk about Jesus or to agree about theology, but what they will engage in together is the theology of the hammer. What Millard Fuller figured out was an activity that brought people from different parts of the Christian world together in positive ways. What interfaith leaders need to figure out are activities that bring people from different parts of the religious spectrum, including atheists, from atheists to Zoroastrians together in positive ways. I'm going to give you a data point about this. Data point's a fancy way of saying statistic. You guys will start saying data point once you graduate from NIU. It's like they inject that fancy language into your head at universities like this. Malaria 10 years ago killed 1 million people a year in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a damn tragedy. Preventable disease killed 1 million people a year. Today, it kills 600,000 people a year. That's still a damn tragedy, right? But it's a whole lot better. Why? Because people running campaigns to reduce deaths related to malaria figured out that if you can get churches, synagogues, and mosques in places like the United States to work together to fund what is really a $5 bed net that can save up to 3 lives, prevents the malarial mosquito from biting an African child, right? Malaria is most active in sub-Saharan Africa. If you can get them to fund bed nets, and you can work with Christian pastors and Muslim imams in sub-Saharan Africa who have mosques and churches at the end of any dirt road in Africa, if you can get them to spread those bed nets, to develop trust in their communities to use bed nets, you can save the lives of 5-year-old African children. And that is precisely what happened. The beautiful thing about interfaith cooperation is it's not just something that happens in Mandela's era, it's not just something that happens in King's era, it's not just something that happens in George Washington's era, it's something that people are making happen now. This is the definition of leadership, figuring out a way to get other people to care. Third, skill set of an interfaith leader. How do you facilitate a conversation between people from different religions so you get good stuff, not bad stuff? Like I said before, there are a million ways that people from different religions want to be at each other's throats. Different beliefs, different practices, different ways of relating to God. That's why they're called different religions after all, right? How do you get them to have a positive conversation, a major skill set of an interfaith leader? Here's what Ephraim and Elia are doing at the Better Together group. They're saying that everybody at NIU, whether you're an atheist or a Zoroastrian, ought to have a place to go to be quietly reflective. Whether you are doing Muslim salat, or whether you are praying a Catholic rosary, or whether you're using Hindu prayer beads, you ought to have a place to go and quietly reflect. That is a conversation that's bringing people together. You know what else they're doing? They're saying that service is a way that people from different religions, there's not a religion in human history that doesn't care about serving others. Interfaith leaders create service projects like Habitat for Humanity that bring people together and ask the question, what in your religion inspires you to serve others? Quick review. You cannot be an educated person in 21st century America if you are not able to positively and proactively engage religious diversity. A part of leadership in the most religiously diverse country in human history and the most religiously devout nation in the West at a time of global religious conflict is interfaith leadership. When you graduate from this university in 3 or 4 or 5 years and President Baker or the provost hands you your degree, part of what you should ask yourself is, over the course of my time here, have I developed a vision for interfaith leadership? Do I have a sense of what it means to go from religious diversity to religious pluralism? From a place where people from different backgrounds gather to a place where they have respect for each other's identities, relationships between different communities, and a commitment to the common good. Number 2, have I acquired a knowledge base of interfaith leadership? Can I mention more than just George Washington's example of interfaith leadership? What about Thomas Jefferson? What about James Madison? What about Benjamin Franklin? What about moments in American history that we are not so proud of when it comes to religious pluralism? Do I have a knowledge base of this stuff? What do I know about other religions? Can I name great Buddhist leaders or great Hindu leaders? What do I know about Christianity, whether it's your own religion or somebody else's that you would admire? Third, are you able to tell an inspiring interfaith story? Are you able to deliver a public narrative that would inspire other people to get involved in interfaith activities? Are you able to form those activities yourself? Are you able to facilitate a conversation where people from different religions focus on the positive together? That's what it means to be an interfaith leader. That's what it means to be an educated person in the 21st century. That is part of why you're at Northern Illinois University. I have to tell you something. There are not that many public universities who have decided that this is something that ought to be a priority. You are on the vanguard. You are amongst the first set of public university freshmen, first-year students, who are going to be getting this as part of your university experience. Part of who you become is going to be like the pace car for other people, right? It's part of what I love about universities. Constantly experimenting, constantly out front, constantly in leadership. So here's what I want to close with. At the end of the day, if you were to ask me, what is important? What should I focus on? If I was going to focus on one thing when it comes to being an interfaith leader, what I would say is get to know somebody from a different religion in a positive way. I want to leave you with a set of lines from a great Native American poet named William Stafford. This is the first and the last stanza of a poem called A Ritual to Read to Each Other. If you don't take the time to get to know me, and I don't take the time to get to know you, then a pattern that others made may prevail in this world, and following the wrong God home is our star. Those who are awake must be awake now, or else a falling line may lull us back to sleep. The signals we give must be clear now, because the darkness around us is deep. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. The Q&A is a part of the presentation. So if you have a question for me, I will ask a question of you. By the way, I told the students I engaged with earlier this morning that I began life as a high school teacher. I am very good at calling on people, especially the people who are darting their eyes about and trying not to get called on. So, all right, someone's got a question for me. Why don't you stand up and come to the front here? And if folks want to line up and ask questions, we'll do that for about 20 minutes. Then you all can go. Yes, there's a microphone right there.
Oh, microphone. When you were talking about how America is the most religiously devout country,
In the Western Hemisphere.
yeah, you said that. I felt that you said that the way that other people are not as devout was kind of like you said it as if it was a bad thing.
Yes. Thank you. You know what? If you caught that, I did not mean it, but I appreciate you calling it out. I did not mean that. I meant it simply as a sociological fact that in other industrialized nations, religious devotion is lower, and what that means is that in America, interfaith leadership is that much more important because the fact of engagement with religion is higher. But I appreciate you calling that out because if I gave you that mistaken impression, perhaps other people had it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. No problem. A point of clarification on the program.
Hi. Well, since it is voting time right now, and since we're at the time where we're not necessarily leaders ourselves, but we are working towards that, what should we look for in our leaders in order to help encourage this whole big family working together?
Yeah, well, what a great question. Well, first of all, I mean, you know, you are leaders, right? I mean, and the beautiful thing about a college campus is it's a place that cultivates leadership. It's a place where you can come up with an organization like Ellie and Afraid and say, hey, look, we're going to start the Better Together group, and we're going to imagine an interfaith space on this campus. You can get to work on it. So don't think you're not leaders right now. I promise you, you are, right? Or you at least have the opportunity to be. So look, what should you look for in other leaders, in public leaders? I mean, for me, it's actually simple, right? Like here's my question of any public person, whether they're the president or whether they're a concert that I'm going to see, or honestly, whether they're an athlete, right? My question is, do I believe you? Right? And so maybe you have other questions also, but consider that as one of them, right? Like, when you listen to somebody talk, and they're making a bunch of promises, and they're telling you what they're gonna do and who they are, ask yourself the question, do I believe you? And for me, that's a gut level thing. It's not science. It's just like, I look at some folks and I'm like, I just don't believe you, you know? So you can have your own, folks have their own compass around leadership and politics. That's mine. Do I believe you? Thank you for that. Most polite students in the world, DeKalb.
In today's world, where many religious leaders do harm to other people, and they do it in the name of the Lord or whatever the Lord they call it, how would you suggest changing their ideals with service projects?
That's a great question. So, look, people are going to take different approaches to this, right? But my own personal approach is try to increase the quantity of good, right? And if you increase the quantity of good, it will naturally crowd out and marginalize the ugliness and the bad stuff. That's a long-term strategy, you know. The great African-American writer James Baldwin once said, my task is to get my work done and to last, right? I'm not in this. I don't think like religious violence is going to end tomorrow or next year. I don't think religious prejudice is going to end tomorrow or next year. I'm in this for the long haul, right? And I think the long haul means focus on increasing good and hope that crowds out and marginalizes the bad. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so I feel that most of your other religions you talked about were God-based, and I feel that part of being a plural person is understanding that most religions, they're not all about God. How do you feel about other religions that are not God-based?
I think that's a great question. So just to be clear, I talked about Buddhism a couple times, right? Buddhism, there are dimensions of Buddhism or interpretations that are not God-based.
More about nirvana.
So religious diversity is about engaging with people from a range of beliefs. And it's not about agreeing with them, it's about having positive relationships. And so I would like to think that I take my own advice at least some of the times, and I try to develop what I call that appreciative knowledge base of other religions. Right? So in Islam, my religion, God is at the center, right? We Muslims say the first part of the Shahada is La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God. And I have great admiration for people like the Dalai Lama, who comes out of a Buddhist tradition, Tibetan Buddhism, that isn't God-based. And I have great admiration for secular humanists like A. Philip Randolph, right, who don't believe in God but play a central role in the civil rights movement. So religious diversity is about having admiration for and working with people whose belief systems you disagree with. Thank you for your question.
I'm going to ask the big question that's been bothering me for the past few weeks. How do we combat against such a hateful group such as ISIS? How do we, as the NIU student body, positively affect what's going on?
Yeah, I think that's a question that's been bothering me a lot too lately. I think that's a hugely important question, and thank you for that. So I think that groups like ISIS, just to be clear, I'm not a pacifist, right? I'm extremely reluctant vis-a-vis violence, including the use of a nation's military. I think that sometimes it has to be done, and when it's done, it ought to be done in highly strategic and judicious ways. And I think ISIS is clearly there is a significant strategic and judicious, but significant military dimension to dealing with that. What can the NIU student body do? I think amongst the most important things, honestly, is not to confuse ISIS and Islam. Right? Like, don't let them speak for 1.6 billion Muslims. Like, basically, don't believe them. They're crazy, right? They're crazy, they're barbaric, they're brutal. When they try to speak for a religion that's 1,400 years old and 1.6 billion people, just call bullshit on it. Just be like, I don't believe you, right? Like, that's garbage, that the stuff that you pull, represents all these people and this tradition. Right? I think that's the most important thing average citizens can do when it comes to any form of religious extremism.
Hi, Dr. Patel. I kind of had a personal question.
What's that?
I kind of had a personal question.
A personal question?
Yeah.
Okay, I might not answer it.
Not that personal.
You can choose to ask it if you want.
Okay. So as an American Muslim, like I feel that peer pressure kind of ties in with religion, and
What ties in with religion?
yeah, like peer pressure.
Peer pressure.
And I kind of want to get your take, like on like if you ever dealt with that, and like throughout my life, like I've kind of been raised through like a Catholic family, but I've gone through the Muslim traditions of what my father went through. So like I just kind of wanted to get your take.
Yeah.
Like
So the role that peer pressure plays when it comes to being within a religious community or vis-a-vis like trying to follow a religious tradition while there's all sorts of other influences around.
yeah,
Right? Yeah. I mean, everything that happens at Northern and at other college campuses is perfectly in line with Islamic teaching, right? No, it's not. Let's just be clear. So I thank you for that question. So here's the question. I'm going to make this a little bit more universal. So the question is, how do you deal with peer pressure, especially when you're trying to follow a path that you think is righteous? In this case, it's Islam, but it could be Catholicism. It could be just being the kind of person you want to be. So I'm gonna make this a little bit more universal. Again, I commend you for asking a very courageous question. So this is something I talked about this morning, and I feel strongly about this. The reason that my colleagues at Interfaith Youth Corps and I only work on college campuses, we're a 40-person organization. We've worked all around the world. We actually, 5 years ago, decided to focus the organization to only work on college campuses and with college students. And it's part because you all are a lot more powerful than you think you are, right? Remember, King was 20 when he heard that speech from Mordecai Johnson about Gandhi, and it changed the direction of his life, right? I mean, King would not have been the leader that he was. There would have been, Montgomery Bus Boycott wouldn't have happened the way that it happened. March on Washington wouldn't have happened the way that it happened had it not been for that speech. But also because this is the time when you're making decisions about who you are. And I think unlike a lot of other times in your life, we're in high school, the way I talked about it this morning is it's like a little bit like you're on an escalator, and in a way other people are supplying you with your identity, right? And then when you graduate from here in your professional life, there's a lot of other people telling you what to do all the time. When you're in college, you are the accumulation of your actions and decisions. It's that simple, right? You are the accumulation of your actions and decisions. So, if you want to walk around for 4 years in an alcohol stupor, that's who you are. You can't blame it on anybody else at Northern. If you want to, do other things, right? Start reading or writing poetry more seriously. Work on take that science project the extra step. Think to yourself, you know what? I might actually want to write an honors thesis in the political science department. Then that's who you are. But there's no other time in your life but in college where you are almost entirely the sum of your actions and decisions. And so that's what I would say, right? Is this is a powerful time to decide who you want to be and then to follow through with that. And you can, there's plenty of intoxicants on a college campus. My hope is that you take the intoxicant of ideas and you take the intoxicant of developing and forming and following through on your identity. And I think that that's a really powerful thing. And there are other things that I think, honestly, are less helpful, if you will. Not to sound judgmental, just to tell you where I'm coming from. Thank you for your question.
So the Interfaith Youth Corps is focused almost primarily on college students, right?
Yes, college campuses more broadly, but college students obviously within that.
And although I understand that's a really good idea because we're all becoming adults now, we're all able to make our own decisions, and we can legally do most of the stuff we would like to. But don't you think there should be a little bit more of a focus on people in secondary schools? Because I understand in Acts of Faith you experienced bullying, I experienced bullying for my beliefs. So I feel like there should be a little more focus when we're beginning to start our own ideas.
That is a great insight. What's your name?
I'm Jamie.
Jamie, you should start that organization. I'm serious. organization to start. You should start an organization that focuses on religious diversity issues in high schools. You should sit down right there next to Afreen and Ellie, who are to have started the Northern chapter of Better Together, and you should talk about what it looks like to perhaps expand that to engage with local high schools. But I promise you, right, don't, another beautiful thing about college is any idea that you have for somebody else to do, you have some form of an opportunity to do it yourself, right? That's your organization to start. In 5 years, I'll come to one of your speeches and I'll ask you a hard question.
So in your presentation, you emphasize gaining knowledge about as many faiths as you can. Outside of interacting with people of other faiths as being the primary source of knowledge, is there any particular text you would recommend reading that kind of covers a broad range? And I have a second part, if you don't mind.
That's a great question. So, I actually have a favorite comparative religions text, like introductory one. It is Patterns of Faith Around the World by Wilfred Cantwell Smith. My single favorite intro comparative religions text. I never get asked that question. Thank you for letting me show my geek side and tell you my favorite texts in this subject.
And is it okay if I ask another part?
Yes, ask another question.
I've actually read a book like that myself, and one thing I noticed is that they didn't cover agnosticism at all. And I find that interesting considering, and I could be wrong on this, so if I am, please let me know because I find this important. The impression I get from my generation is that we're becoming increasingly agnostic, as in, or you might have people that like go to church, but in their minds they're more agnostic. How would you recommend like engaging in the sort of folk that are agnostic?
Yeah.
Would you emphasize more reflection on their faith, or would you emphasize more of a secular, like a utilitarianism?
So I think that's thank you for that question. So at IFYC, we consider atheism or secular humanism or agnosticism a different orientation around religion, if you will. So those folks have a seat at the table, like Muslims and evangelicals and Catholics and Jews and Jains, etc. But if you're looking for good books in that area, which is where we began, I would commend to you a book called Faithiest by a guy named Chris Stedman, actually one of our grads at Interfaith Youth Corps, or a book called Good Without God by a guy named Greg Epstein. Great, thank you. Okay, all right.
I've noticed that a lot of conflicts in the world lately are being debated in terms of like possible military action and stuff like that. And I was just wondering, like, how do you think like religious conflicts and I guess conflicts in general can be solved in a time, like how do you think these conflicts can be solved diplomatically in a time where regular diplomacy seems like useless?
Yeah, so I mean that's a great question. So I don't think regular diplomacy is useless at all. I promise you, there's 100 conflicts that's happened in the last that could have happened in the last year that diplomacy prevented, right? There's no doubt about that. I think that's an excellent question. So let me give you a book to read also. When I'm not smart enough to answer a question, which is most of the time, I tell people about smarter people. So Madeleine Albright has a great book called The Mighty and the Almighty, where she talks about the role of diplomacy involving understanding of other religions in preventing conflict. Right? But I think the bottom line for me is this: you've got to be able to build pluralism. You've got to be able to build pluralism. And ultimately, a widening of pluralism, that respect, relationship, and commitment to the common good, that will at least manage and mitigate as many more conflicts than it is currently managing and mitigating.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question kind of has two parts. How do you feel about the religious state of the younger generation, such as ourselves? Do you feel like it's on the rise, or do you think teenagers are kind of straying away from religion? And what can be done to attract youth to more devout religion?
Yeah, so thank you. I think those are great questions. Look, I'm a religious person, right? And I think that religion is a very good thing in many people's lives, and it sociologically can be a good thing for the world, but it is not my job, if you will, to attract people to religion per se, right? It's just not what I do. So I do think it's important and honestly a part of a college education to be what I would call a morally reflective person. To ask yourself the question, what do I believe in? Why do I believe those things? How do I act in some consistency with those things? I will say this, that I think that young folk, I think that folk who are within religious communities, especially the leadership of those communities, I mean, they have to do a better job of reaching out to younger people. There's no, like at the end of the day, I didn't care about religion until I was like 19, and it was just because I thought it was boring. And until I came across stuff in religion that I was deeply inspired by, namely service and social justice stuff, I write about this in the book, in Acts of Faith, I just thought it was boring. And I think that people within religious communities have to do a better job of making it not boring. Yeah, great.
Hi. What were your greatest fears when you created Interfaith Youth Corps, and were you afraid of pushback because you are Muslim?
Oh, that's a great question. So, honestly, I was too dumb to be afraid of things. I mean, it's part of the beauty of being like 23 and thinking that you're right and that other people should just listen, right? So I did a lot of pounding on the table. I did a lot of telling folks that there really ought to be a movement of young people who orient around religion differently, come together to serve others. And I think that honestly, I probably started off not being very good at this, and I just probably got better and better and better, right? I acquired more knowledge, I learned how to tell stories better, I learned how to shape activities better, I learned how to facilitate conversations better, and I'm glad that folks who I talked with this about at the beginning were patient with me. So, I mean, look, there's been like all kinds of crazy stuff said to me as a result of being Muslim. There's no doubt about it. And honestly, I'm nervous sometimes for my kids who are 7 and 4. But it's just not part of my nature. Look, I just feel like the luckiest person in the world, right? I mean, like, I dreamed this job, and I get to do it now. And I've been doing it professionally since 2002. My friend April Mendez and I have been running this organization. I mean, that's like, who gets that, right? May you all have that. May you get to dream a job for yourself, and you get to do that. So I don't spend a ton of time thinking about ways that I'm unlucky. I just spend a ton of time thinking, how do I do best what I want to do and try to make a contribution to the world? Thank you.
Many young people and even students here at NIU are who are first-generation students and who are first-generation Americans, such as myself, kind of go through the same struggle that you went through with the conflict of what does my family and tradition want me to be, what does my society want me to be, and what do I want my contribution to the world to be? What advice would you give young people?
What a great question. So honestly, here's my advice. Take college seriously. Okay, and here's what I mean by that. Not just the dimension of college that is going to get you a professional credential for a job. May that come true, of course, right? But take seriously the reading assignments in humanities courses and history courses. The history of this country is a history of people coming from 4 different corners of the world, speaking different languages, praying to God in different ways, contributing their own distinct identities to the United States of America and lifting up a nation, right? So you are like generation 120 in this great American story. And college is a place where you learn that story and ask yourself the question, how do I shape that, right? So my big advice to you and anybody else in that boat is take college seriously.
So were there any really big influences in your life or like really like pivotal events in your life that you didn't get a chance to talk about in Acts of Faith?
What a great question. There's a book's worth of them called Sacred Ground that I wrote after. That's a great question though. Yeah, of course, right? I mean, yes. And a lot more important than whatever pivotal events in my life might have been are honestly pivotal events in your life, what they have been and what they yet might be. So as you read Acts of Faith, I hope you ask yourself the question, where have I seen or even experienced religious prejudice? When have I been inspired by somebody from a different religion? When have I had a really enriching conversation with somebody who believes in God differently or not at all, differently than I do, right? So what I hope is happening as you read Acts of Faith is you're getting more and more curious about your own story, right? Acts of Faith is my story towards becoming an interfaith leader. I'm hoping that as you read it, you are in your mind writing your own story, right? So one day I will be reading your book, I'll be coming to your talk, and I'll be saying, are there any events that you didn't write about in this book, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So throughout school, we are taught about huge conflicts with religion like the Crusades and the Holocaust. Do you believe that the rise of terrorist groups that are backed what they do with religion are starting a new huge wave of conflict, or do you believe the conflict was always there, it's just more publicized now?
Oh, what a great question. So I think the answer to your first question is yes. I think that the form that religious violence takes in our age is terrorism. And in previous eras, it has taken different forms, right? And the Crusades and the Holocaust are two of those forms. I mean, I remember there was a minister in the Dutch government who came to visit Interfaith Youth Corps at some point, and he said, look, you have to remember that for about 5 centuries, every 30 years or so, Europeans from different religions went to war with each other, right? And that's the form that conflict took in that era. Do I believe that there will be conflict in the future? Absolutely, right? Do I believe that religious belief and belonging will play some role in some dimensions of that? Probably, right? So what is our job then? I mean, our job is to make a contribution to the era in which we live, right? So I'll tell you a quick story. There's a great story from the Islamic tradition, my tradition, about there's a story about Prophet Abraham in a fire. And there's this woman who takes a pail of water, a single pail of water, and throws it on the fire. And somebody looks at her and says, I mean, what a dumb thing to do, right? There's no way that a pail of water is going to douse the fire, is going to extinguish the fire. And the woman said, let it not be said of me that when I saw the prophet of God in a fire, I did nothing. Let it be said that I did what I could do, right? That's all we can do. You can do what you can do, right? So I mean, it's funny, I'll go give a talk at a university, and they'll start a student group, and then like a year later, this is a true story, I go back, and that group will come to like a smaller session, and they'll be like, okay, but we ran a Better Together campaign, and we got in the interfaith space, and we had a panel discussion with people from different religions, and there's still religious violence in the world. And I'm like, I hate to say it, you could do it all again next year, and it could be twice as big, and there will still be religious violence in the world, right? All you can do is make your contribution, and I think that's all you were meant to do, right? There's a great line by the Buddhist poet, Gary Snyder, you can see that you got me going on this, right? Your job is to move the world a millionth of an inch, okay? Your job is to move the world a millionth of an inch. That's it.
How do you make a more welcoming environment for religious faiths that focus more on the individual, like Thelema or Satanism? And also, how do you reconcile with faiths that tend to do things that mock other religions, like the Black Mass for Satanists, kind of showing a mockery towards good faith?
So we have relatively few ground rules at Interfaith Youth Corps, but what one ground rule is no overt hostility, right? So I think it's an interesting question, like what might be defined as overt hostility, but I would, in my definition, I would put mocking in that. So I think that there should be room for a vast array of traditions, identities, and beliefs. I do think that there's a line somewhere. That line is a judgment call, but I draw it at mocking others. Thank you.
Hi, so a classmate of mine was up here recently, and he was asking about combating ISIS. And that made me think of something. Generally, especially lately with the Canadian shooting, we see just how much our American media makes the problem worse sometimes in the way it's portraying, and we give into the fear-mongering, basically. And I was just wondering, and how can we combat the ignorance and sexism and racism in the media as a college student who doesn't really, or what kind of power do we have to combat that?
But I mean, tell other stories, right? And you live in an era where you have channels for those other stories to get out, and you just have to be, I think, a big part of being a leader of any variety is the ability to tell stories in a compelling and inspiring way. So tell other stories.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Nice to see you again.
I had a question, more like a personal question, but it would, more or less to tie with acceptance of different religions. One of my things is I never find myself as completely Christian or whatever. More or less I believe in this part of this religion, I believe in this part of that religion, and together it's just what I believe. What would be your take on something like that? Should people be one religion, or is it acceptable to have multiple parts of multiple religions?
I mean, I think that's a great question. So the question was, tell me your name again?
Robert.
So Robert said that he finds himself believing in different parts of different religions, and what do I think about that, and what do I encourage people to do? So, I mean, first of all, I don't tell people what to believe, right? Like that's your decision to make, and for me, that's part of respect for identity. So if you want to come and ask me, if you want to come and ask me about Islam and Muslim belief system, I will answer your questions. But basically, because as a Muslim, but basically outside of that, I don't tell people what to believe, right? So I will tell you this, that you are probably part of a reasonably sizable category that calls itself spiritual but not religious, or kind of pastiche religion, which is to say that they dabble a little bit here and a little bit there, and they patchwork things together. And it's not for me to decide whether that's good or not. It's honestly for you to decide that, and I think for you to keep exploring that. But I will say this, you are not alone in that, right? You are not alone in that. So, find a community of folks who are involved in that. Read in it. Again, this is, I think, part of the beauty of college, that in high school, it might have been, you could have said that, and you might have just gotten a bunch of blank stares. But in college, there's actually places you can go. The Better Together Club, or courses, or whatever it might be, where you can read in this stuff and meet other people and just continue to explore that. And if you're different at 22 than you are at 18, hey, that's a part of life, and I think a beautiful part of life.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert. All right, we'll take these two and then close out.
Hi, this is a question that always comes to my mind in any religion-related discussion. Do you believe the world will be a better place with less prejudice and less violence without the existence of religion?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Do you believe the world will be a better place with less violence and less prejudice without the existence of religion?
Do I think that there will be less prejudice and less violence without the existence of religion? I mean, I think that that's a courageous and honest question. My answer to that is no. Right? That doesn't mean that religion is not culpable in many forms of violence, right? Right? I'm not naive about that. But if you take away religion, think back to the Mandela story I told, or think back to King and Gandhi, or think back to Gandhi and Bacha Khan, or think back to Moses Heshes and George Washington. You also don't have those things, right? So there is an awful lot of positive stuff that religion has put into the world, and that people from different religions working together have put into the world. Basically, I want more of that and less of the other stuff. Thank you.
words in your mouth, so stop me if I'm saying something incorrect. You said that no matter where we come from the earth, if we come from like different parts of the country and different religions and different languages, that we all pray to the same God.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
I said America by definition is a place where people come from the four corners of the earth, and they pray to God in different ways, including not at all, but collectively we build a country.
Okay, so you believe that different religions have different gods?
No, I said pray to God in different ways.
Okay.
You cross-examining me? My wife's an attorney, so I've gotten a taste of this before.
No, I'm just asking because I can't wrap my head around, like, the God of Christianity and the God of Buddhism are completely different gods, so I just wanted to ask if that was what you said, that they're the same God, because we pray to...
Right. So, in the Muslim belief system, of which I am a part, we believe in a very focused way that there is one God, right? So what that means is that we believe that people who might pray differently are still praying to one God. That's a belief. And dealing with religious diversity is recognizing that other people might have different beliefs.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, last question right behind you.
Sorry, I just, came up here, but what is your take on the notion that maybe religion was used as propaganda to get us into war in the Middle East in the first place for reasons above and beyond religion itself?
Yeah, that's a great, I think that religion is used in ugly and propagandist ways all the time, right? I don't think, the thing about religion is that it's a multifaceted thing, right? So if you want to spend the next 20 years only looking at the bad stuff that religion does, you could literally spend 20 years doing that, right? If you want to look for the next 20 years at the propaganda dimension of religion and it overshadowing other dimensions, I promise you can do that as well. I think both kind of like my personal philosophy, but also, if you will, my theory of change, my theory of how the world gets better, is when people get a hold of good stuff, right? Stuff that's inspiring, stuff that helps people, stuff that makes a contribution, and you grow the quantity of that. So I could spend all my time like trying to shout down religious propagandists, like you're talking about, or trying to shout down crazy folks using religion, and I mean, those folks need to be shouted down. It's just that's not what I don't want to spend all my time like in the face of ugly people, right? Like I want to spend my time like growing things that I think are beautiful, right? So I mean that's what I would leave you with, right? Is again, I mean this is like these are the first weeks of your college experience, and I'll tell you something. I would trade places with you in a second. I would trade places with you in a second because I've been in all sorts of interesting places in my life, but the world never felt as fresh and new as when I was an undergraduate student at a public university in the state of Illinois. So I'm going to leave with one final quote, and I'm going to let them do their thing, but here's my quote, right? This is what college is about. The quote is from Marcel Proust, the great French writer. He says that the true journey of discovery is not in seeing new landscapes, it's in developing new eyes, right? And that's what I hope for you. Ultimately, beyond this interfaith leadership thing, I hope you become interfaith leaders. I hope you move diversity to pluralism. But even deeper than that, I hope that your college experience is enriching. I hope that it brings you to new landscapes, but most of all, I hope that it helps you develop new eyes. Thank you so much for being a great audience. Appreciate you.
The first and second year experience office has provided you with this, and just thank you for taking an entire day to come out here and share your experiences with the students of NIU.
Join their organization. Join their group.